On cruise ships today, we're used to having these amazing views of the ocean. There's lots of panoramic vistas and things, all because there's a lot of large windows and open spaces around the top areas of the ship, especially around restaurants, lounges, and other venues aboard cruise ships. But some people have wondered, how come the older ocean liners, ships that date back as far as the 1900s or even the late 1800s, how come they didn't have these large open spaces? And frankly, there's a few answers to that, but the first answer, the most important one, actually has to do a lot with the weather and with the ocean itself. So obviously, the larger the windows you have on a ship, the more susceptible it could be to being smashed in by some kind of wave or some really heavy winds. Now, ocean liners are not like cruise ships. They didn't travel for pleasure. They traveled to get their passengers from one point to another, come rain or sunshine. And even if there was a storm blowing through, they would do their best to steer around the storm, but they still had to sail right through it in order to meet their destination on time. Now, part of that means that when they go through these storms, they are susceptible to whatever weather there is. If there are huge ocean swells 60 feet high, they will come up to the top areas of the ship and start hitting the windows and things. And like I said, the larger the window, the more likely it is going to be smashed in really rough weather. But that makes people wonder, surely they could have designed the windows in some kind of way to make them stronger and allow for larger windows. And that's where the second reason comes in. Now, to kind of summarize it, basically, like I said, ocean liners were designed to take people from one point to another, and to do it as fast as possible and as efficiently as possible. And so that means that in the early days, a lot of people who traveled on ocean liners were doing it out of necessity. And especially since a lot of the people in third class or fourth class, depending on what ocean liner you were on, were people who likely had never been on a ship before out in the open ocean. And so being on the open ocean had its own kind of fears, its own kind of phobia, because for many, many centuries, it was always well known that ships got lost to the sea. And even in the times of ocean liners, it was not uncommon to hear of an ocean liner being lost to the sea. So there was a kind of fear. And these ocean liner companies, they tried over the years to continue to develop the interiors of their ocean liners in such a way that it made you forget that you were at sea. And this only applies to the early ocean liners. I would say liners before the 1920s. Basically, with ships like Lusitania, Mauretania, RMS Campania, Oceanic, ships like that, there was this great need to make them a lot like fancy hotels that you might see on the mainland somewhere. The ocean line companies would often hire all kinds of architects and engineers that worked on famous hotels such as the Ritz-Carlton to come in and work on rooms and things for the ships. In the early days of steam travel on the oceans, ocean liners were quite small and cramped, and very often people actually shared spaces. There were large dormitories that people had to share, and there was usually one dining room, and everybody had to sit on these benches and things. And as the years went by, these ocean liner companies built larger ships in order to create more space within them to compartmentalize everything, as well as to carry more passengers. And so these things not only helped make the ships more comfortable, but it helped make them feel more like a hotel, as opposed to some kind of sailing ship that you're hoping to God would actually make it to its destination. And so as time went by, they were able to make larger interior spaces and bring in more light into the ships as well. So while ocean liners in the early 1900s didn't have these large vistas of the ocean with massive windows usually, they did have a number of portholes that were used to bring in natural light. When you look at the old dining rooms of older ships such as RMS Mauritania. I mean, first of all, you can see that the dining rooms had to be located on lower levels due to how many people they could fit. And when you have those dining rooms at those lower levels, you can't just have large open windows. You're closer to the level of the ocean, and therefore larger waves can slam into those windows. But they were able to put in a lot more portholes to allow light in and make these areas light and airy. But I would say roughly around the 1920s is when we started to see larger windows show up on ocean liners, larger areas with these big, massive windows. I mean, true, when you look at Titanic, it had the smoking rooms and lounges with massive windows, but those windows often faced onto the promenade decks of ships like that, and the promenade decks helped provide some kind of break against large waves that might hit the area, so it helped protect those larger windows a little bit. But when you look at ships like the RMS Queen Mary, for instance, some of its best views were seen in the Veranda Grill restaurant, which was located towards the upper stern of the ship, and it had a great view of the ocean looking aft on the ship. And there were other ships as well that had these massive, beautiful rooms, and they were usually located high up on the tops of the ship. That meant that even though the rooms like the Veranda Grill, for instance, on the Queen Mary, had these large vistas, the Queen Mary still had a dining room that didn't have large windows. It was just a bunch of portholes that allowed some natural light to come in. But as the 1950s and 1960s rolled in, we started to see more tourism come in. We started to see more people traveling for leisure. And then cruise ships became a much bigger thing. People started actually booking cruise ships to go to tropical places. And that's when that need for the great big vistas came in. Soon ships had to be retrofitted with larger windows, or frankly, brand new ships were designed with large open spaces and big views of the ocean. And that wasn't limited to just the large public spaces. That also became a thing for the staterooms. When you look at the QE2, she wasn't originally designed with balcony rooms. They had to add those in later on in order to help the ship earn more money whenever it went out to do cruising duty. And so those large sliding glass doors and things, those were dangerous to put on lower levels, but that's why they put them all the way up high on the top of the ship. And so that actually helped with cruising duty. And if you think about it, cruise ships are not generally supposed to be put through the rigors of open ocean storms. Sure, they do run into storms occasionally, but they mostly sail in shallow areas and in more tropical areas and usually in good weather. So it's actually safer to put these large open windows and sliding glass doors and things all over cruise ships. But ocean liners still had to remain with smaller windows and very close-knit spaces. But when you look at the Queen Mary II, which is the most modern ocean liner created, and frankly the last one still in service out at sea, they had to kind of compromise. So the lower areas of the ship, I'd say the bottom half of the ship, had these small closed portholes. Granted, when I say small, they are actually much larger than normal portholes on ships like the original Queen Mary, for instance. So they do permit more views of the ocean. As you go lower and lower on the decks of the ship, the windows get smaller. But they were able to start putting in balcony rooms even on the areas just beneath the promenade deck, because they were able to set those rooms back a bit away from the edge of the ship, and they have these large steel openings that allow the people to see out, but if there was an ocean wave that came in, it would kind of be broken up a little bit. But as you go above the promenade deck, you'll start seeing the large open windows with sliding glass doors and bigger views of the ocean. And it was safer to put those up above the promenade deck because it's high enough above the normal water line of the ocean that usually even the largest waves wouldn't reach them. Of course, that's just usually. You never know what the sea will throw at you, but nevertheless, that was a safe place to put them. And so that's why the Queen Mary II has kind of a combination of rooms. And so it was kind of a good compromise. And so that's where you see a modern ocean liner today. The Queen Mary 2 managed to fit all the needs of a cruise ship into the needs of an ocean liner. And so, folks, that is the story here. That is what made people forget that they were on the ocean, was the ability to actually feel like they were in a hotel. And of course, the small portholes and things around the rest of the ship made it harder to look out and see the ocean, and instead your focus was on the interior spaces of these ships. The beautiful ornate interiors made you feel more comfortable, made you feel like you weren't necessarily out at sea, that maybe you could just pretend that you were in a very fancy hotel. And so it helped with that very much. True, it's like I said, the larger the window you would put on these ships, the more susceptible they were to being broken. But nevertheless, it's possible they could have gone around that. But the reason why they didn't was because it was also necessary to help the passengers forget. Granted, that doesn't mean that every passenger wanted to forget they were out at sea. Lots of passengers would love to take strolls on the promenade decks and the boat decks of the ships and look out onto the ocean. So some people actually really enjoyed their journeys on the ocean liners. So the answer isn't necessarily a one-size-fits-all answer, but these are just a few of the reasons why you didn't get those grand views on large ocean liners until the 20s and 30s. But anyway, folks, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.